Hello, this is Tharyn, and I would like to talk about the difference between self-development and self-realization. So these two things generally go hand in hand. In my own experience, being on the path for so long, a path, which at first you feel like is a path, it's a journey towards a place, towards another destination, towards something that will eventually happen in the future, this spiritual development, this I'm going to develop myself gradually, I'm going to do yoga practices and meditate and go through strange breath patterns so that eventually I will become good enough to get to this place, and maybe someday, eventually, I will find this self-realization experience where I remember that I'm everything, and all of this kind of large, skewed, mystical thing, this path of self-development. Now, honestly, there's nothing wrong with either of these things or either of these labels as we use them. Self-development is a great thing for when you are consciously and conscientiously developing some aspect of your being. You're learning new skills. You are perhaps learning how to become more compassionate, becoming more skilled with artwork or drawing or music, or you want to increase your public speaking ability. There are so many things that are great self-development practices that everyone has, and many of us do that for fun, to get somewhere, seeking a desire or a result or an outcome, or doing it for the journey, etc., etc. Now those are all true things, and those are all wonderful things. But to develop oneself in order to achieve self-realization is not completely accurate or true in the highest sense. So we've talked a lot about, I've talked here a lot about self-development. So self-realization, what it is and what it isn't. What it isn't, self-realization isn't you will come to attain some permanent state of consciousness, some permanent external state of being. An external state of being meaning, in my own language, everything is truly external to the awareness that simply is the base of consciousness, of your consciousness, which isn't yours, it is simply consciousness. And self-realization is about noticing that you are not any of those beliefs, you are not any of those journeys, you are not any of the moving parts and pieces within awareness, that you are not even the self that you happen to be developing. And it's funny in my own experience how much I believed that myself, that I would get there, that I would eventually, that I would realize the truth of enlightenment or of self-realization. And it doesn't realize it. The self is never going to attain this thing, because this thing that it is trying to attain is not a thing whatsoever. It's not a concept, it's not an idea, it cannot be touched or grasped. It can only be pointed at. And what notices itself is itself. self-awareness, this prime state of your being, this underlying consciousness, this empty, aware presence, the presence of being that is always here, it's not a self. The self, or what we often call the ego, the mind, the ego, it inherits its very presence, its very knowingness from this unspeakable, unpointable, well, we're pointing at it, but untouchable, nameless presence of being. There is simply being. And this is what I posit is self-realization. And this basis is often overlooked, and it can be forgotten very easily, very quickly. And the self then takes reign as the center of your life experience. The false self, which is what it is. And there's nothing wrong with the false self. The false self is serving the purpose of being the show that awareness is watching at this moment. However, there comes a great relief, a great spaciousness, an unforgettable remembering that is at the very core of your knowing, of your being, that you are not this body-mind, and that you are not anything in the transient experience of your life. There is no way to improve upon it. It is simply open, pure, complete, its potential. It is the complete and utter potential, which allows everything to arise. It allows this life to arise. It allows the stories to take place, and then it observes, and it more than observes. It observes isn't the right word, but it holds space for the story of this person. It holds space for my story, for your story. It holds space for my own self-development. And what I find, there is the liberation from seeking some external thing that will eventually make me happy forever. This is the crux of all desire and seeking at the underlying level, is when will I find this state or this thing or this person or this circumstance that will securely, steadfastly, never-endingly give me happiness, peace, and contentment. The self is continually seeking that in the transient world of form, because that's what it is. It's made of form. And from within form, it operates. And from within form, there is no such thing. The nature of the form is change. And so it seeks a stable peace. It seeks that inner peace, which it will never find. And so you, as awareness itself, is forgetting its own complete presence in this moment, its own completion here, present tense. And that is why there's a general tendency for seeking. And as soon as you notice it, you just notice, as awareness, it becomes obvious. The seeing becomes obvious. Oh, there is nothing in my awareness that is constant. Therefore, the self that I take myself as must not be who I actually am. And the realization can come in chunks, it can come in different stages, and it trickles down. It can be smooth, it can be elegant. And for me, it's kind of trickling in more and more. There's times of being very much oriented as the ego in order to do things. But there's at any time and often this overwhelming remembering. It's a knowing. Remembering is a strange word. Remembering is a word that comes from the mind to describe the eternal nowness of our being. Because it's always awake, it's always aware, it's always knowing. It is the basis of our aware knowing of our life. But we think we are the contents of life as opposed to the space with which it arises in. And then we develop the self in order to eventually achieve some state of enlightenment, which is an idea. It's a state, it's a thing. If it's anything, then it can't be it. If it's anything, then it cannot be the totality of it. It cannot be the completion of it. If you can think of it, then it's not quite it. It's an impression of it. An impression, a stamp, a reflection of it. But it itself is utterly nameless, utterly open, utterly available, utterly spacious, and utterly present. And there's nothing special about it. There's nothing that the self can get out of it. It doesn't do anything for the self, because the self is trying to grind in and create a solid identity. But when you peer at that solid identity, you peer at it close enough, you'll peer right through it. You'll notice that there is no solid identity. It's just colors changing. And that you are actually the awareness of all of that. It's the fundamental belief that so what I find in the world of self-development and the world of spirituality is, and the experience that I've had going through those worlds, is that there's such a striving to get somewhere. The most enticing fruit of enlightenment. It's so tantalizing for the self. It makes the self have a holy quest, a holy mission that gives it great purpose, and it's significant. And the ones who have seen this in the past and spoken about it are highly revered. There's a lot to be gained. The self sees that there's a lot to be gained from this fruit of enlightenment. And I see now the warnings that those sages gave for the ego, the warnings they gave to seekers and to students to be pure in their intention to know God, to know the truth, and to not get wrapped up in any of the other things that the ego might try to latch onto. Because if the ego's latched onto it and it holds firm on that identity, then you will be that much more stuck in that view, and the mind won't see it. You won't relax enough to see the true nature. It's just that the sages have said to be pure in that desire for truth, and I find that so obvious in my own life, so obvious in my desire for both, in my noticing of the ego's desire to attain this thing and then be good enough to speak about it. And then upon seeing the blatant simplicity and utter simplicity of what that actually is, the truth of whatever that very primal essence of being is, it's way simpler, it's way more humbling, it's way more open and mysterious, and it doesn't budge for the ego. It doesn't give the ego a place to stand upon. I have nowhere to stand. There's nowhere that I can stand upon. And then I'm okay with that. And then it's floating upon the ocean. And knowing that I am untouchable, I am indestructible, and that my essence, my purity, my completion is already a given. And that, it's so brilliant and tricky. Because the separate self, the ego, is truly a piece of the whole. And when the awareness takes on that veiling, when it forgets itself and it believes that it's just a single individual piece of the whole, but in reality it's whole, it is the whole, it is complete, and it veils and forgets, some of it doesn't forget. And that is obvious. That's very obvious. Some of it doesn't forget itself. But as we are these humans, we do overlook the nature of our being, and we become small, focused identities. And those identities seek the completion that is their true nature, but its seeking is outward. Its seeking is for other pieces, to get enough pieces together so that it can have a grand understanding. And I'll tell you that what I've seen is the whole of all of our collective consciousnesses all together. Every single universe and sun and every single being that has ever had an individual experience, all of that put together, if that was all in your mind right now, that is not the true nature of God, of the completeness. Even if you have the complete picture of the form right in front of you, and you see everything, it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story. You're still mixed up in the content, the form of the formless. And the formless is the awareness, the intelligence, the beingness. No one can take your sense of presence. No one can take that from you. If you're put in prison and you know yourself as the presence of God, you're not in prison, are you? And so that can apply to life. That is, I would say, one of the more practical applications for the self, something that it can sort of gain. The self can begin to integrate the wisdom of that inner state of indestructibility, that inner awareness that is presence of being. And so to bring it back around, self-development is a beautiful thing. And I'm still eager to develop so many aspects of myself, but I am not mistaken. I am no longer mistaken at all that that is who I am. It is the play that is happening here in this moment, but there's a fundamental shift. Self-realization is to completely undermine and look past and look through the egoic self, not as a personality, not as anything. You will not be a bigger self. There's no bigger self that sees the egoic self. It is completely inaccurate, and I have this belief as well. Self-realization is the noticing of the complete lack of any self whatsoever, the complete lack of solidity, the complete, utter, open, spacious, unknown to which the self, the egoic self, arises. So that's why I don't really actually like the word self-realization. I much more like awakening. Awareness awakens to itself. I like that much better. Because self-realization is pointing towards this realization that will occur as a self. And there's no self that will realize this. Awareness itself, only awareness realizes this, that it just is. It just is. It just is. And then there is self, and therefore the whole universe. Therefore, the whole of creation. Self-development is wonderful. I encourage everyone to develop themselves. But if you truly want to taste the truth of awakening to your true nature, then explore. Explore the nature of your thoughts. Explore the nature of what's in front of you in your reality right now. Because the present moment is where the wisdom and the answers are. You can ask the right questions. You can take yourself deeper. And you can see the illusory nature of everything. And as you do that, I promise that awareness will gradually shift from ego, and it will loosen, and awareness will awaken more and more, gradually or suddenly, to its own fundamental nature. Its fundamental nature as a divine question, a divine mystery, a divine openness, a complete open possibility, with absolutely nothing tainting it, not a single layer of anything on it, just nameless, wordless. Thank you for watching.